I had a professor when I was doing my master's. I went to it was contemporary classical, which initially when I got in, even then, was really hard for me to understand. And I went to I was a concert of a bunch of composers and a panel discussion. And some of it was interesting. Some of it just sounded like you were throwing a drum set and an elephant down a flight of stairs.
Welcome to episode 83 of the Bass Shed podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. What's up, folks? What's up? On the episode is New York bassist Charley Sabatino. Charley Sabatino, man, that's a name right there. Charley Sabatino. I love it. I love it. All right. You go down past the laundromat. No, not that one. The other one with the gumball machine. Yeah, the one with the gumball machine. Go down there, you hang a left. They're right there by the delicatessen. That's where you're going to meet Charley Sabatino. All right? Right there by the delicatessen. Charley Sabatino. Man. The name is so Italian. I love it. Between him and Anthony Viti from episode 79, I think we're starting some kind of bass mafia here. And I'm all about it. I will talk more about Charley in just a second. If you have a record to sell, if you have a single to sell, if you have creative property that you would like to sell, check out Fine.com. It is a new platform for artists, musicians primarily, to sell their creative content, their albums, their singles, etc. Check them out, Fine.com. Check out episode 76 of the Bass Shed podcast, and that is my talk with the owners of Fine. So go make more money than streaming and put your stuff on Fine.com. Double bassists. I know you're out there. And you may be wondering, where's a good place? Where's a good place for me to go to get everything I need for the double bass? I wonder where that spot would be. You know where it is? It's lemurmusic.com. That's right. Everything you need for the double bass. Stop by lemurmusic.com. Use the promo code TheBassShed, all one word, for 10% off. All right, so some of you may remember that I had a 5-string strung with a high C. I brought it to a gig, folded pretty hard. Thankfully, I brought a backup bass to that gig. That bass is now back to standard 5-string tuning. I washed my hands of it. You know, I gave it a go. I think it's not for me. Not because I felt uncomfortable. Like, I had been shedding on it, and I've started to feel comfortable with the C string and all that. Then I just realized, like, I want the bottom end. If I'm gonna have a 5-string, I want the low register. So, you know, I know y'all were curious about how I had that bass strung. As if anybody really cares. But that's what I did with it. And that bass is a D. Lakin bass. Stop by dlakinbasses.com. Check them out. And Dan will build you the bass of your dreams. They are direct order only. Stop by dlakinbasses.com. My guest on the episode, Mr. Charley Sabatino, is a veteran bassist, composer, and educator with more than 40 years experience. He plays both upright and electric bass, encompassing a wide range of styles, and performs throughout the New York metro area. Charley was the music director for the jazz workshop at the Cadenza Music School. From 2010 to 2018, it consisted of ensemble classes of players of many levels and ages, learning the art and science of jazz performance and improvisation. Charley also leads a trio titled Charley Sabatino and Looking Forward. The instrumentation of the trio is bass, keys, and saxophone. So it is a drummerless trio, which I think is a really fun instrumentation. You can check out clips of the trio at charleysabatino.com. I will have a link to Charley's website at thebassshed.com/podcast/Charley Sabatino. I had a lot of fun talking with Charley. The conversation starts with him talking about a new project he's working on and educates me on some terminology. The talk here progresses into some kind of like heavy theory discussion. We talk a lot about jazz theory, and it turns into kind of a heavy theory hang. Which I always love. Charley is incredibly well-read and knowledgeable, and we will discuss jazz theory and composition and general philosophies about jazz and improvisation. It was a really fun time and really informative time chatting with Charley. And here it is. Here's my talk with bassist and educator Charley Sabatino. Yeah, by the delicatessen.
Hey, Ryan.
Hey, Charlie, how you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Doing well. We made it. It worked out. Oh, man. What's been going on? What's been going on since NAMM?
Teaching, usual stuff. Teaching, writing. Working on some stuff. Got a couple of performances coming in and out. Working with some other players and doing some writing for other projects.
Okay, that sounds fun. Like jazz small group stuff or bigger, more elaborate groups.
My group is going to be anywhere from 4 to 7 pieces, depending on the tune.
Okay.
I've written the tunes. I've orchestrated them. Now I got to go back and decide it. Just because I did, should I? If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
We all know that.
The age-old question.
Yeah, and then I'm working with a Brazilian composer, Guillermo Gregorio, and right now it's just a 3-piece, but it may get bigger. I did some performances with him, and now we're doing another set, and I'm starting to write as well. It's sort of in the third stream vein, which is kind of like a classical and jazz together.
Okay.
Interesting stuff.
How, like, if we can hit pause, I'm curious about this. So I've never heard the term third stream. When I think of classical and jazz combined, my first inclination is to think of the ECM label, and I think of that stuff, a very, very colorful pastels, not a lot of tension, not a lot of blues in the music.
No, third stream. If you look at one of the main guys that has worked on it in the past is Gunther Schuller. Okay, and he's done work with Monk, and he's done work with all the players. Now I'm talking about like contemporary classical and contemporary and like Ornette Coleman and Coltrane in there.
I see.
It can get rather aggressive. It can get rather angular. His charts are immensely difficult.
Now, when I think of that music, when I think of later Coltrane and Ornette, I think of just all the freedom that was in the music. So how does a difficult chart equate to that? Is this music free, or is it almost composed? It's a
mixture of both.
Okay, a lot of free sections.
Yeah, so there can be sections of performed parts, and then some improvisational parts, some harmonic, some harmonic.
Okay.
Some of the stuff, I don't know if you're familiar with any of this stuff that like Anthony Braxton has done, where it's kind of like cymbals as well as notes.
Yeah, I know of it. I've never played it. It's monumentally,
I don't want to say so much difficult, but you finish one of those tunes and it's like running a marathon, because it's one of the things that this kind of music does. And it's in all kinds of music, but it's even more so here is, what happened as jazz became less dependent on harmony. So even if you just start in the 50s, when it was going into modal jazz, right? As the harmony became less restrictive, okay, the listening part had to be more important, because like, think about if you're playing, So What, and it's 2 chords.
Right.
Okay. You can only play your D minor pentatonic so many times, right? So it becomes more along the lines of, first of all, it's something I talk about when I teach all the time, is understanding the notes throughout the board, as notes, not as a pattern, but it's also listening to what other people are doing, because that brings it. So if you alter some of that harmony, which you can, you have to make sure that you're all doing it together. It's like a conversation. If you're having a conversation about baseball, you're not going to suddenly talk about, the price of rice. Right. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Right.
So it's interesting stuff. I tend to write a little more tonal than say Guillermo does, because I like tonal harmonics, because I think sometimes when there isn't a harmonic structure, sometimes it gets a little bit too much of like, look how many notes I can play, or how many times I can squeal my horn, and that's my opinion. My music in my group, which is Charley Sabatino, when looking forward, it tends to be a mixture of traditional and contemporary jazz, sometimes together. Because I find that sometimes some of the free stuff, and I do a lot of it in Brooklyn. can sometimes get to be just a free for all. But I could say that about a blues jam. I could say that about, so the whole idea is it's making it that when you do go out, it's for a reason.
Yeah.
It's like gratuitous violence in a film. Okay.
Right.
Sometimes it's needed. If you're having a fight between two people, of course.
Right.
That kind of stuff. That's the kind of things that I'm trying to work on.
Okay. What is your process when writing? Like you just spoke about the lane you like to stay in as a composer, but now what's your process to, like, I checked out your videos on your website from your group. What's kind of the initial concept or idea, and then how do you go from there?
All right. I usually, what I tell my students, because with my students, I eventually get into composition because it shows them that there's more to life than the bass.
Sure.
Sorry.
And as bass players, I mean, if you're writing a bass line in the studio or like coming up with a part, it's a compositional,
right? But
it's still a compositional approach.
It's understanding that there are other parts to the music.
Absolutely.
And I tell them that composition is one of the few places where the cart before the horse is okay. You can start with a bass line, you can start with a set of chords, you can start with a concept, you could start with words, any of those. So sometimes it depends on what hits me. I've done things like, I was reading a Persicchetti's book on 20th century harmony, and he was talking about chordal harmony. And I said, okay, I understood Debussy used fourths. Fourths are icky, we know, but he was talking about something that a lot of jazz guys do, especially, is they'll take a normal chord, a regular chord, which are basically thirds, and reharmonize it so they're fourths.
Sure.
Right. So I'm like, okay.
I always think of McCoy, like that's a McCoy thing.
Exactly. That's exactly the one. Yeah. So I said, I want to do something with that. So I decided to make a tune based on that.
Okay.
So sometimes I went to see one of my friends perform one time, and I went home, and I was actually out of town when I went to see him play. And I went home and I said, I got an idea. And I wrote the basic concept of a tune. At least the basic concept. And when I got home to an instrument, I could fill it out, and anything in the middle. I had the privilege one time. I was playing in Brooklyn with this artist, and another person was playing, and it turned out to be Ramsey Amin, who played with Archie Shepp and all this. And by meeting him and talking with him and stuff, I said, we became friendly, and I wrote a tune based on him, based around him, because he's a violinist, and so any of the above.
Okay. Then once you have the concept, and now how do you look at kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Communicating that through the music. Are you looking for like colors that get a vibe? Are you looking for a beat? Like if you're writing about a person, are you going to write a beat to the way that they move or their speech pattern, or?
Well, in this case, I wrote it because he was a violinist, so I did something that was based off of a violin line that I wrote.
Sure, okay.
Sometimes I'll be over a beat. A lot of times, I tend to like dense harmonies, and I tend to think about things, voice leading for voice leading's sake. Meaning, if I play a chord, whatever it is, I think about the individual movement of the voices. I don't think about, it's got to be a 2/5 or it's got to be a 1/6. I think about, okay, I'm playing this chord. Where do I want the chord to be? Where do I want to move? And I'll listen to the movement and then identify the chord.
Yeah. I mean, when writing, I do something very similar, kind of look at it like kind of the natural, and you know what I mean by this, and I'm sure that there's a musical term for it, that every note within the chord has a natural inclination for where it wants to go.
It's all under voice leading.
Yeah. And then like, okay, you play a major 7, like, okay, well, let's take the 5 up to make it an odd chord, then let's resolve that to the 6 of that chord. Or what if we take that moving note and then like put another bass note behind it? You have angular bass movement against this voice leading line or something.
Right. It's
understanding.
It's understanding something that a lot of my students have I've been trying to push with them, is that all music is just moving voices. If it's just a guitar player and a singer just playing, an acoustic guitar, every one of those strings and that they're all moving voices. And Ernst Tock, who was another author that I read, says that harmony is a snapshot in time. Right. So if you have a song going along and that snapshot may be tonal, it may be atonal. In other words, if you're going from chord to chord or even a section to section and a bunch of voices are moving to one, you may have a snapshot where it's like, 8 quote unquote, dissonant.
Yeah,
but it's leading, the ends justify the means, as it were.
Of course.
So it's that kind of stuff, like you said, sometimes you may make it an old chord. It's like, well, that's going to sound weird. Yeah, but where's it going?
Sure.
I read a book and they were talking about playing certain things, and they talked about, I believe it was Freddie Hubbard. No, it actually was McCoy Tyner. I'll say it back. He was playing a 2-5-1 in C, and over the C major, he played the notes of a C sharp 7 chord.
Okay.
And you might think that's like he's swinging cats. Yeah. But when you listen to it, it's the way he came in. And the way he came out, it just became color. Now, if someone just played a C sharp major over it, it would have been horrible. It's the dovetailing, it's the voice leading, it's the movement. And part of music, whether you're playing a bass line, soloing, a melody, or writing, it's the entirety of the movement. Mm-hmm. You can have parts that are jarringly dissonant. Yeah. But it depends on what's going around it. Persichetti would say in his book, things sound more dissonant if everything else is consonant.
Yeah, of course.
So if you have Mary Had a Little Lamb and you throw a dissonant chord, it's going to be much more obvious. Which is kind of obvious when you think about it, but when you read it, you're like, oh yeah, so it's build up and build down, as it were. Hindemith talks about tension and relaxation. It's that whole idea. Yeah.
I mean, and harmony, functional harmony. The tenets of functional harmony are all built around that: suspension, tension, release. That's all it is. End. Yeah.
I think, how many movies have you seen that were really good and had the worst ending? It ruins the whole thing. It's like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. I just finished a TV show actually like last night, and it had kind of a weak. It didn't have the payoff of the ending that I was hoping for. And similar thing, like, oh, come on. Really? That's where we're going with this?
Very few series and very few movies that have had really good endings. One of them I'm showing my immaturity here. The Avatar animated series. It had probably one of the best endings in the history of television. Really? Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay.
Yeah. I watched it with my son when he was younger, and it had probably the best ending it could ever be. I've never seen an ending that good.
Really?
Yeah, and
I'm gonna go check it out just for that now.
Yeah, it was really good.
Okay. I was specifically talking about Peaky Blinders. Like, I was obsessed with the show, and like I couldn't get enough of it. When this new season came out, I was thrilled, and I knew it was the last season. And then, no spoilers for anybody who might be into the show, but it did not resolve the way I was hoping for.
Nothing worse. But that's part of the whole thing here we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you can do it on purpose, which is fine. Especially if music is utilitarian, if it's using for a purpose, if it's part of a show and it's a weird part of an end of a scene, you could have things sound weird, of course. But it's how you detect it and how you determine it. And this gets kind of ugly too, because what's convincing and what's good or not, it depends on the composer and depends on when in history. Yeah. You think about guys like Richard Strauss in the late 19th century. A riot went out, broke out in the middle of Salome, one of his operas. I mean, they literally burnt the place down.
I remember hearing about that like way back in the day. Yeah.
They call it the Night of Scandal. It's just like, I mean, I've had some pretty bad nights gigging. I'm assuming I never had a riot break out because of it.
Just the idea of that, right? You're just playing like a quartet hit.
And bass player. Yeah. But I mean, you think about that. Like, Coltrane was openly booed after he would become an icon. Right. Schoenberg, guy picked a fight with him after a gig at a pub because they didn't like his music. I said, I've had some bad nights, but none of that's ever happened to me, man.
There's a level of that's like, whatever. Clearly, those people that were writing didn't dig it, but it moved them in such a way that they went there. So, like, kind of mission accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, except for whatever, any lawsuits that would happen afterwards.
I don't know what insurance was like in the late.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, that's a different.
I don't know if State Farm was there. Jake hadn't been born yet.
Where's Brad Paisley on that one?
Yeah, but I mean, the whole idea with a lot of this, and it's what I try to work with my students, even my beginners, is understanding that music is holistic. Unfortunately, a lot of times, going to NAMM, you see it too, is that the bass line becomes so much important. It's like, yeah, it's important, but it's of the equal importance of all the stuff. Well, what about ones that have a groove? Yeah, but it's the rest of the stuff around it.
Yeah.
Right. It's all I have, students when they start transcription and stuff, I say, take a song you like. Don't take a Charlie Parker solo. You're not a jazz guy. Don't do that. Take a song you like. Take a song you've known all your life.
Yeah.
You know the bass line. Write it out, find the chords, and find out why you like it. Because there's probably going to be something in there you like. It's not the whole, it could be the whole thing, but there's a couple of things like, oh, that's really cool. He or she did this and he or she did. It's like, well, did they know that? It doesn't matter. You do.
Yeah, right. Right. And you can add that to your toolbox. What are some of those off the top of your head? Transcriptions or tunes or bass lines that you've gone back to check out because you loved them that might not be a super popular, it's not Donnelly by Jocko, or it's not this thing we all feel that we have to go through.
Well, I'll give you a couple, and a couple of them were spurned by the pandemic. The one I talk about all the time when I'm teaching is if you look at the album "Kind of Blue" by Miles Davis, right? Highest selling record of all, jazz record of all time, still beats every jazz record ever made, right? But what I like about that record is that there are 4 different soloists, actually 5 because there are 2 piano players, right? Yeah. And each one of them seems like they're in another planet. So the one I always talk about is Freddie Freeloader. Because if you listen to the soloists, they're so different. And for someone, I'm introducing improvisation too, because a lot of players, I mean, I've taught death metal guitar players improvisation. So there's a lot of guys that want to learn this. They don't necessarily want to be a jazz player, but it's still the same concept, is that you hear these players and they're so different. And the one that I love more than anything is Miles, because there's so much space.
Yeah.
One of the problems we have with these instruments, behind you and behind me, is because we don't blow into them, we forget to shut up.
That's something I talk about with students, actually, is breathing when you play and practicing breathing during your line. Because if you want to, there's all this information out there, like sound like a horn player and all this stuff. Play horn. If you want to sound like a horn player, play horn. There's a way to maybe get some of that vocabulary in your line construction, but ultimately you're a bass player. But the thing we can learn about horn players and phrasing is to make it sound more lyrical, liken it to speech. There's going to be breaks.
That's why players sing when they play.
Absolutely. And that's the best tool. And if they're not going to do that, still breathe. And while you're playing, breathe out. And then finally, don't play when you have to breathe in. To actually create that actual breath in the playing.
Yep.
But I completely agree with you about the space. And, Charlie Hayden, it was the master, one of them, at doing that thing and leaving that space.
Yeah. The other thing that I try to tell them too, and maybe you and I maybe have in disagreement of this, and maybe we have to do it another time over a cup of coffee, is that there's no such thing as a bass solo.
Okay. I'm fascinated.
There's no such thing as a guitar solo.
Okay.
There's no such thing as a horn solo. It's just a solo. I've taught ensemble classes with, full ensembles in there. And I've taught improvisation to them identically. Now, the physicality of it obviously is different, but the phrasing, the harmony, the approach is identical.
Yeah, because you're coming from this. I agree. Because you're coming from this. We can still get the coffee, but I agree. You're coming from this holistic place of it's just improvisation.
Right.
It's not just because you're a bass player doesn't mean you're quarantined to this thing.
But a lot of people are. I can't tell you how many times I've had students and they can't break out of that. And I look at it as 2 roles. You have the supportive role and the melodic role, and they are separate roles. Sure. And I tell them, I said, you have to do something to break out of that. A breath, thinking of a switch, an opening door, anything that when you're going from the melodic role to the supportive role, because once you're in the melodic role, you're the melody.
Right.
You're not supporting the harmony. You're working with it. You're not supporting the groove. You're working against it. You're not supporting the form. You're blurring it. It's all the things that the melody and the horn or the piano or the singer does. Then you can step back into that role again. Because if not, you're not doing anything different.
Right. To qualify what I just said about, like, if you want to sound like a horn player, play horn. Let's just put it this way. What I study is Bergonzi's pentatonics. So what I said when I meant that is the marketplace is flooded with it. And they see and hear a bunch of guys online doing all this stuff, and they lose the functional bass player supportive thing in their playing. And that drives me nuts. And then
it's going back and forth.
That ignites the bass player in me. It's like, just play the bass. Like, I'd rather hear Jamerson drop his bass than listen to any more of that.
Oh, there's a time and a place for the two roles.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes,
I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just like if you were a horn player and you were playing your section and then you did a solo. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Or I remember I used to work with a band leader many years ago. I did, we call them club dates here in the West Coast, weddings and stuff. We call them club dates.
Yeah, we call them casuals. I think you guys call casuals something else. All right, I know that there's a thing. Yeah.
The guy used to say, I can find 1,000 lead singers. I can't find any backup singers. Because you get a lead singer and 4 people singing lead behind them.
Right.
It's the same idea. So yeah, the reason why I talk about those two separate roles is because they are two separate roles, and there's a time to be in one and there's time to be another. Now you could switch in back and forth if you're doing some sort of interplay, but it's, when you're in the supportive role, you're a bass player. You do what you're supposed to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, absolutely. And all those tenets, all the characteristics of being a supportive player are all still part of the melodic thing. And the melodic thing can be brought into the supportive thing. It's not too different. You can play melodic walking bass lines, where you're just soloing basically.
The harmony's different though. If I'm
how you approach harmony, you mean?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying. That's what I mean by two different roles. If I'm looking at a C7, right, and I'm playing in the supportive role, I'm thinking about the fundamentals of that chord and outlining that chord so someone else can work off of it. Sure. If I'm soloing, I'm thinking of, sharp 9, flat 9, sus flat 7, sus flat 2, tritone subs.
Right.
Coltrane changes, all the different possibilities, which I would
deep
never
flat melodic
do
minor over the whole thing. Yeah.
Right. So I wouldn't consider that at all in the supportive role, because that's getting in the way of someone else who wants to do that.
Sure.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
Harmonically, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really more what I'm talking about.
What has been your personal process to get out of the box, and what was actually, it's two separate questions. One, what is it now to continue pursuing that? And two, what was the first inspiration for you to start thinking this way? Was it records you heard? Was it guys you were playing with? Was it things you were reading? I mean, you've already talked about a bunch of books. You're well read.
It was part of my education. I had some really good teachers. I was listening. I was coming in. As a kid, I was a rock and a metalhead. And I came in through fusion and into traditional jazz, and I started hearing stuff, and I wanted to do stuff that, a certain way. And I started finding teachers, and I went to college. But I had a couple of guys who sat me down and said, the whole idea is that you have to find your place. One of the guys I had the honor and privilege to study with, Billy Bauer. Billy Bauer was a guitar player. He played with Charlie Parker, Lenny Tristano, the whole shebang, bang, bang. And, he said, remember, the Clark Terry said the 3 levels of musicianship are imitation, assimilation, and innovation.
Sure.
So he said, you have to, Charlie Parker lines are fine, but you're not Charlie Parker. Charlie Parker's dead. Move on. Mm-hmm. And it was understanding, okay, how do I get past all this? And it was working through the harmony, just, day in and day out. Yeah. He and another teacher of mine, Dr. Christie, brought a very strong work ethic into my playing. Okay. I'm talking about 2 guys. These 2 guys were in their 80s when I studied with them, had careers, frightening careers. One, Dr. Christie was a bass player. He had an amazing, classical and jazz background. So he had amazing careers in both, and both of them still shed every day.
Yeah.
And they instilled it on me, and it's always looking for more things. So for I would look at it. You don't know my music stand is here. You had no idea.
Okay.
Like you'd know that. I have, a standard, some standards I've been playing all my life, but I look at them differently, hit them differently. I work on fundamentals every single day, whether it's intonation on the upright or reading, basic reading on the electric, and just it's a constant build. They both taught me that it ends when you do.
Yeah.
And it's listening and reading, and, I'm a total music nerd like that.
Nah, join the club. What are you listening to right now?
I'm reading a book on the.
Oh yeah, I've read that one.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
I'm listening. I'm kind of re-listening to the sections.
Okay.
As I'm reading the book.
But because this is an audio podcast, that was the Love Supreme, the book. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't think about it at the time. I'm like, oh yeah, I've read that, and no one knows what the hell I'm talking about. There's one by Bill Cole. Have you read the Coltrane biography by Bill Cole? That was kind of deep. It talks about a lot of African philosophy.
I read one on Coltrane, and I'm looking at my book, and I have one Coltrane on Coltrane that's on my list.
Okay. There's a bunch of great ones.
Yeah. But I'm listening. I'm re-listening to that with what was written here, because there's a couple of things you kind of miss. Like a lot of the stuff that Jimmy Garrison does. I'm not saying you lose it, but when you listen to it, it's because I was actually talking to a student this morning about it. Some places he has one chord to deal with.
Yeah.
Forever, and you have to make more out of it. And a lot of he was doing was out of the rhythm and out of the groove, of course, working with Elvin. Yeah. So I've been listening to some of that. I was listening to, I don't know if you're familiar with Barry Guy, the bass player, is a European bass player.
No.
Kind of avant-garde-ish.
Okay.
Some of the stuff gets a little noisy, but some of his ensemble stuff is kind of interesting. Gets a little like I don't know if you're familiar with prepared instruments. Yeah. Some of that, which I don't dig at all. Okay. But just some of that.
I like that stuff for concept, like a lot of the John Cage stuff. Love the concept. I'm not going to go seek it out.
Right. And for me, I'm listening to it for, in that case, is how the different instruments are dealing. Because I'm looking for sometimes different ways. I had a professor when I was doing my master's. I went to it was contemporary classical, which initially when I got in, even then, was really hard for me to understand. And I went to I was a concert of a bunch of composers and a panel discussion. And some of it was interesting. Some of it just sounded like you were throwing a drum set and an elephant down a flight of stairs. Really, and I'll be honest. But he said something that was very interesting, and it stuck with me. He said, "This is not music to listen to while you're doing the dishes."
Sure.
Right. So it introduced me to the concept of active listening, which I kind of did before, but I never thought about it, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And some of the stuff I listen to is active listening. I listened to a whole bunch of George Russell's ensemble pieces. His orchestration of jazz bands are just out there, and it's amazing. Not in a bad way. They're not atonal. They're not. It's jazz, but some of his voicings are just beautiful. Yeah. And
I read a whole book on his Lydian chromatic theory.
Yeah, I have that too.
Yeah,
a lot of that. Mark Levine in his book, I think, handles it a little better in explanation.
Okay,
it's not as. I don't want to use the term academic, but it's not as like flowery. But his book, I think, is much more useful in terms of trying to learn this stuff.
Okay.
And he has a lot more examples you can find. It's the jazz theory book. It's probably the best book on jazz theory there is, in my opinion. One of my teachers played with him, and he's a really cool guy. But the way he does his orchestration, again, for active listening, as a composer, as a performer, trying to see what's going on. It's very interesting. That whole Lydia chromatic concept is a great way of thinking of it. Is understanding that the whole concept of vertical and horizontal harmony that he talks about, Persichetti talks about. It totally kind of breaks things up. You realize that you need both. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of things I've been listening to. I also listen to Ginger, who's a great Ukrainian metal band that I love. Amazingly musical. It's a 3-piece and 4-piece, excuse me. And the bass player, at least in my knowledge, is the only one I've ever seen that uses tapping.
Oh,
in an ensemble situation, not in a solo situation.
Right.
And it's beautiful.
And that's on what string? How many strings are on the bass? Or does he use a stick too? Does he go that far with the tapping?
No, I think he's just using a bass. It may be a 6. I don't remember.
Okay.
But it just, the band is really good. One of the things, they mix genres. You'll hear I don't know if you're familiar with the band at all. They're very cool. It starts out with sometimes some tunes will be like a reggae feel, then they'll go into the screamo thing, or they'll do like a 90s feel into the screamo thing. Really knowledgeable. I love the way they're really purposeful tunes.
Okay.
And I like Arch Enemy, which kind of annoys my family. But I listen to a lot of different things because to me as an artist, that's important.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to find different ways to work on my craft.
Sure.
And I don't like to stay in one genre if I don't have to.
Do you notice a lot of those, when you listen back to a piece after you completed writing it, whether
I get sick. I cry.
Right. But the initial thought is, why am I still doing this?
Right. After I've been talked off the ledge.
Yeah. Do you hear those influences after you listen back or have it performed with the group? You're like, okay, now I can kind of see some things that came out in the music that I wasn't necessarily aware of when I was writing it.
I don't know. I don't know if I can say that specifically, but what I feel good about is I when I bring it into especially my piano player, Chris Forbes, he's a New York guy, amazing piano player. Is that when I give him my piece, sometimes we'll just do the two of us and I hear out of the piano what I heard in my, twisted little head.
Right.
Which to me is a good thing.
Yeah.
So do I specifically hear, the influences? Sometimes I will, because sometimes I'll be writing if I read Levy's book, which is another book on harmony that's really good. Jacob Collier mentioned it in one of his interviews, so I picked it up. It was 60 pages. It took me a year and a half to go through. I have notes in it like I'm in the Manhattan Project. I mean, it was that intense. But some of the stuff.
Does it come with the dictionary? Does the book come with the dictionary?
It just does. Just some of the stuff. It was just so I just had to, I had to reread some pages, 2, 3, 5, 6.
Yeah.
Dude, I got a master's degree. It's like, I shouldn't have to do this, but it's amazing. But it just makes things that you do that much more, that's what I do. Cause I have no life. That's what I do with my life. But it's, sometimes some of those things will come out of it. Like when I wrote the piece for Ramsey, I used negative harmony in part of it because I had been reading about it. I said, well, this might work with the violin. So because it was more of an ensemble piece than anything else. And it was cool because the inverted harmonies made some interesting chords.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Excuse me. Talk about the Talk about the phrase negative harmony for those that may not understand the term.
It's a weird thing, and I don't know if I agree with it 100%. All right.
But disclaimer has been noted.
Yeah. If you take a C note and you make a C chord, C, E, G.
Yeah.
Then you invert it behind it. You have an F minor because you're inverting the intervals.
Okay.
Levy says you'll have an equal propensity to hear the F minor or the C. Again, I don't 100% agree with it, but what it is that you take a melody and then you just invert it about an axis.
Right. So thinking through that, if you have a C major and an F minor underneath, you have F, A flat. If they're being stacked off the F, A flat, C, E, G, that's an F minor 9 chord.
Right. But I'm not talking about them together. I'm talking about them separately.
Okay. So it's kind of a polytonal thing.
Yeah. And think about doing a melody with those chords and then you flip them and you do the melody again.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I've done it a couple of times and it's interesting. I don't know if I'd make a career out of it.
Sure. I don't know if a career can be made out of it.
Yeah. In music, there can't be made out of much lately.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's just things like that. I would hear and say, "Oh, that makes sense." I did one song one tune that I'm hoping to rehearse in the next couple of months. That has a lot of that in it, and I'm hoping that it works the way I think it's going to work.
That's a fascinating. Because when you do flip the chords, so then it's the C with the F minor on top. Would it still work like that? Do you still take the same triads?
So it would be say you're doing C, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
And if you invert it, your first chord is an F minor.
Right. Okay.
And then the melody is inverted as well.
Okay. So it's always C major against F minor. That's kind of the tension, like
no, it's linear, not
okay.
harmonic.
Okay, I was thinking about it vertically.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, then doing inverted A, inverted B, inverted.
Okay,
it's afterward.
Right. What's the tone road terminology for that when you invert the?
Oh, retrograde.
Yeah. Okay,
it's sort of like that, but it's still tonal.
Right.
And again, like I said, I don't know if I'd make a career out of it. It's things that I'm trying to see what it does for me. And what it does for me is it shows me that when I do other tunes, I can let myself, I don't want to use the term let myself go, but let myself go. When I did my thesis, I wrote 3 pieces and 2 of them had specific harmonic rules based on my advisor. The last one I went and I just wrote a piece.
Okay.
And it was cool, so after a while you have to just what does Charlie Parker say? Learn the scales and then forget them. Yeah. It has to be purposeful. You have to be in the right place. But after a while, it's like when you're talking, you're not thinking about, conjugating verbs when you're talking. You did that already. That kind of thing. Yeah. So I'm just trying to find out where do I fit in this? Mm-hmm. And I see by some of the later tunes that I've written where I think I'm going. It tends to be more open. It tends to be more modal for now.
Is that because of you want to create because when you write tunes that are more open and more modal, you're creating more space for improvisation.
Yes.
In the moment, improvisation. Is that because you've been focusing on that in your playing and looking at all the possibilities of these different, chord progressions you can superimpose? If we go back to talking about So What, and you're just sitting on D minor for a while, all right, well, I can, whatever. I can put in the Coltrane changes. I can do these backdoor turnarounds. There's all these ways I can go from D minor and resolve it back to D minor.
Right.
And so is that something you've been checking out in your own playing? And so you're writing that freedom into the music?
Yeah, partially. And also partially that when I've worked with players who truly understand harmonics and really do it the way it can be done, I find it very enjoyable.
Uh-huh.
It's not just screaming horns and, 3,000 notes. And also it gives them a chance and gives the players a chance to move the harmony out a little bit. And it gives the music more breath.
Sure.
It's not just, and the way to think about it, and it's ones I tell students all the time, listen to So What 1959, Kind of Blue. Listen to So What 1965, highlights from the Plug Nickel.
Oh, the Plug Nickel sessions is the best.
Right. It's the same tune, though. It's the same tune, but it's not, because first of all, music has moved on. Yeah. Right. Giant Steps happened. A Love Supreme happened. All these things are going on. Miles is going into his Lost Quintet stuff, what he had with Chick Corea and those guys, which was totally the free music before he went into Bitches Brew. So all of this, but it's other tools have come out. Mm-hmm. He's manipulating the horn. Yeah. Things he didn't do in 1959.
In tandem with dudes that have been playing that stuff and they're burnt out of playing it and they're looking for ways to excite themselves and each other. Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing I'm looking at. I'm trying to make it that it's, Charlie Hayden talks about it, trying to look at the music fresh every time. Yeah. Right. In some things like casual gigs or if you're in a tribute band, you really can't do that.
Sure.
Right. So in some instances, you want to do something different. Just like the jazz guys, the bop guys, they would do their dance hall gigs and then they would go to the after hours joints. Why did they go to the after hours joints? Because they could explore what they couldn't do in the dance hall gigs. So, same idea.
Of course.
Why do you, when you go see any band or any rock band, when you see them live, the tune isn't like the record, except maybe the Eagles, I guess. Right?
Yeah.
Because we want to do something a little different. We're tired.
Yeah, exactly. You want to, I think the people on stage want to hear something different and fresh, probably more than the crowd does. If you go see one of your pop music heroes, you might want to hear it like it's on the record because that's what you've been listening to.
Right.
But the artist is probably tired of playing it that way.
Well, I remember seeing an interview with Liberty DeVito, and they asked him, they said, why do you put so much, when he was working with Billy Joel, why do you put so much effort and stuff? And he said, and of course, this was, back in the 80s and 90s, so the prices are different. It's like, he probably spent, $100 on a ticket, and they probably spent, $20 on the CD, and they probably went out to dinner with their wife. So it's another $100, he says, they're coming, there's an expensive night. I got to give them the right, I get them the whole thing.
That's cool.
And that's again, that's another thing. That's another thing that stuck with me. Sure. But a lot of my influences, and it's something that my teachers taught me, is that it's a movement forward. If you look at the artists that have moved forward, the ones I always talk about are Bowie. Bowie's the classic one. He's always been different. You look at and Miles, the same idea. Train, they got as much crap as they got, accolades. We just talked about Kinda Blue. That got as much critical trashing as accolades.
Yeah.
Anything. Look when Rush went more keyboards. They got a lot of crap for it. Whether you like it or not is not the issue. And he's got a lot of crap for it. And then they changed again.
Yeah. I mean, so is it that concept that goes that permeates your group with the Charley Sabatino and looking forward? Is this part of the tenets that you're building your music off of and your trio around? Yeah, I'm trying to move forward every chance I get. Sure. I try to do that every day in the woodshed. Yeah. Right. I still practice 4+ hours a day. Yeah. If sometimes 6. And sometimes my hands, fail. Yeah, man. Because like you go so hard, like then you have to take a day off because you went too hard the night before. Yeah, it's because I'm trying. There's this place. I've had friends of mine saying, "Wow, why do you shit so much?" Because I got stuff to do. Yeah. If I didn't have stuff to do, I wouldn't be in it. It's art is a life thing. I mean, I have a family, I have a dog, and I have a life besides that. But it's still, music is always in my head, and it's just something that I was taught that it's a constant motion forward. Now, am I successful? I have no idea. I think that's a personal initiative. Initiative, is that the right word? If you're getting out of it what you want. Yeah. Then it's success. I mean, as far as like my music, people that have heard my music, at least the people that I know that have told me have liked it. Yeah. Players that have worked with me have liked it. Am I gonna win a Grammy with it? Probably not. But it's at least it's what I'm hearing in my head comes out. Or am I playing? I get hired to work with other people. People do hire me. Hopefully because they like my playing. Yeah. I hope. Yeah. But hopefully that when I sit down with it in my electric or my upright, depending on the gig, that what comes out of it, is what they want to hear. Mm-hmm. And I guess any of us are that way. How do you? I'm always interested to talk to people about this. How do you organize your practice time? Do you have kind of a regimen you go through? Yeah, my teachers have taught me about planning. Mm-hmm. I'm an absolute lunatic. I plan my practice 6 months to a year in advance. Do you have a journal? Do you have the practice journal? All in here. Okay. I used to have a journal. I just stopped doing that. Yeah. One more thing you got to do, but it does keep you focused. I have a love-hate relationship with the journal. I understand. Yeah. And it generally starts with, fundamental. And it's the same thing I teach my students, actually. Yeah. Fundamentals and challenges. So if I'm doing upright, I'll spend, a time doing intonation work,
with the bow,
Of course.
proper posture, good vibrato, which is a big deal. And I'll work on, like, I'm not a classical player. I'm a jazz guy. So I'll work on some bow stuff. I do work on some orchestral stuff because it's so far out of my wheelhouse, especially since I'm working with this third stream guy. I have to be a little more orchestral. And then I'll start working on chords and changes and improvisation and walking and stuff like that, and pushing the envelopes. Okay, where can I go beyond what I normally do? Where can I do things? If I find myself, say, over a C chord, I keep going to an A. When I go to a solo, just saying, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go somewhere else. If I go over a 2/5 and I do it a certain way, I'm going to do it a different way. And usually what happens is I crash and burn and curse very loudly.
That sounds about right.
And then with electric, it's similarly, I start with, reading exercises and rhythm exercises and stuff. And I'll bring it into, again, working on tunes, and I'll working on either improvisation or groove parts of it. And then some transcription that's involved, things like that. And actually, going back to a question you said, what things I transcribed, when the lockdown came, I've been teaching remotely since 2010, but I had a bunch that used to come to the house.
Yeah.
So initially I lost them right away because I had to convince some of them that remote learning was okay. And actually all of them now are remote learning. Like, I'm not coming home. I'm not coming back. I don't have to drive to your house.
Yeah.
Duh. But I had a lot more time in my hands. So I started transcribing, but I was transcribing tunes that I would just hear. Case in point, there's a drug commercial that uses Pilot's It's Magic. It's a song from the 70s.
I know the tune, yeah.
Yeah. I said, man, that's interesting. And it's a great bass line. Bass player it's a great bass line.
Okay.
Really good. I was in the car with my wife, and she had on some 70s pop thing. And I heard, Love Will Keep Us Together by Captain and Tennille. Mm-hmm. Again, really cool bass line. And what's cool about it is the captain actually played the bass line, and he's an organ player, a piano player. And he actually plays an electric bass, and he did some really cool stuff. Like he would play a B. He would come up to a B, and he would emphasize the 13.
Okay,
and it's like it's not that. I'm saying that a bass player wouldn't do it, but a lot of guys would be like, I don't know kind of thing. But it's like, that's really cool. So it's looking at a non-bass player play the bass and hit a note that probably on the piano is a lot more intuitive.
Sure.
I've been doing things like that, dance tunes and, the simple stuff and I would do bits and pieces just to find those little things. Like I said about students, find the thing you liked about it. I was listening to the bass line in the car. I said, man, that's kind of, you think of Captain Tennille, pop stuff. You listen to it, like, that's kind of interesting. And that's why I wrote it out. It was very cool.
That's it. Was that, I don't know much about them. Was that recorded out here on the West Coast?
I don't know. All I know is when I started researching it, Toni Tennille sang backups on Pink Floyd's The Wall album.
Oh, really?
She did a bunch of stuff. And we forget that people have careers.
Yeah. Right, outside of being this artist that we only know him as.
Yeah, she did that, and she did some other stuff. I looked it up. I said, holy crap. And she had a good voice. I mean, work is work,
Absolutely. You mentioned it a minute ago that you work stuff out with the bow, and that's part of your practicing time, but you're not a classical guy, I understand. I'm in the same boat. I've actually been focusing on that a lot more, actually, is getting the bow together. But do you go through etudes? Do you go through method books? Are you just working on intonation sizes?
I've been playing the bow all my life. I always tend to go toward the jazz part of it.
Yeah, the bow is the secondary. That's what it is for me. Like, I shed it, but it's not. It's
actually becoming more of a primary for me over the last couple of years.
Okay.
But I had one of my teachers gave me all the basics of the bow. So I had that already. But it's the classical articulation is different. Like if I look at one of the Samandal etudes, the 30 etudes.
Yeah.
If I'll play the number one a certain way, and then I'll listen to a classical guy play, and it's like totally different.
Yeah.
And there's a great book, and if you're interested, I can text you a picture later.
Yeah, please.
Some guy took the 30 etudes book, and they have it where it's a piano and bass, and then just the piano.
Oh, okay. Play along, kind of.
Right. And what's cool is that you hear the way some principal philharmonic bass player plays the pieces, and it's different than say someone from a jazz or a rock background.
Sure.
A lot of the articulation is different. I have this other set of books I've been starting to work on, and it's very painful. It's called Orchestral Excerpts. It's by Zimmerman edited it. And it's a 5-book, and I'm convinced that orchestral guys drank too much caffeine because everything is like 9,000 miles an hour. It's like half note equals 120, and it's all 16th notes. It's crazy. What happened to like laying back in the orchestra playing whole notes? What the hell? But a lot of that, again, it's articulation. It's a lot of the sautelier bow. It's a lot of hook bows and a lot of like articulations that when I'm because I solo with jazz with the bow all the time.
Oh, okay.
The articulation's a little different.
Yeah. Right.
Like I said, I've been using the bow for years. I'm not an orchestral guy, and I've taught some classical people. I've gotten them into college, but I mean, I'm not a guy that could go into an I could go into an orchestra, but I'd be sweating it.
Yeah. Right. What was I? Oh, when you solo on the bow, where'd that come from? PC, Slam Stewart, Oscar Pettiford? Did you go through a bunch of those?
Dr. Lynn Christie, one of my teachers.
Okay.
He believed that soloing pizzicato sounded like rubber bands. So he had a beautiful. He played with all the big guys in New York, and he taught me how to do it. And the hardest part about it is the articulation. The articulation on the bow for jazz is different than the articulation on the bow for classical.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and it's learning the swing bow, as it were.
Right.
And your intonation has to be that much better because you can't hide.
The bow. Right. Yeah.
Because it's the bow.
Yeah.
Anyone who knows goes, it's the bow.
Yeah, it's the bow. Like, yeah.
And it gives you a little, it's a different feel. I'll bounce back and forth in a gig.
Okay.
It's a different feel. It's a different thought process. It's a different. You can get a lot more. The vibrato is a lot more beautiful because you're constantly perturbing the instrument, things like that. And what I found is that it affects my electric playing a lot.
Okay. I love this conversation. The left hand, because the right hand, you have the bow. And so you're not, because that's not engaging with the instrument directly as it is on the electric bass.
But you're much more conscious of dynamics.
Of course.
One of the things I have trouble teaching players regardless is dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And electric players more because unfortunately we let the instrument do too much.
Right.
I need better tone. I need better pickups. No.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And it's just brought me more into understanding, even when I'm doing, traditional bass lines or whatever, the articulation, the dynamics becomes more of it. And some of that is the singing we talked about, because the singing does that.
Yeah.
I regularly will have a student will be playing something and it's what I call Stephen Hawking bass, which is like, one line, right? And I'll say, sing it for me. And they sing it in one line.
Mm.
It's like, if it's not coming out of your face, it's not going to come out of your hands.
Right. Right. So yeah, I mean, that's a way to teach ideas. And so now you're teaching them to play ideas and how that relates to what you were talking about earlier with the harmonic progression, and dealing with the whole progression. That you're dealing with the harmonic sequence is a harmonic idea. Playing that and singing a phrase through all of that is, excuse me. That's funny. I know you're a Lakeland guy. Dan Lakin is calling me right now.
Tell him I said hi.
All right. Have you checked out his new basses?
I've never checked out the Lakin basses. I've not seen them yet. I've heard of them and I heard they're really good, but that's all.
Yeah, they're cool.
I'm not a super gear guy.
Me neither.
I have gear and then I stick with it. I've changed a couple of things recently, partially because of endorsements and stuff, but I don't like I've been to NAMM several years. I played, not including Yamaha because I'm there for them. I think on all the years I've played 3 basses, maybe 4.
Yeah.
Once I have what I have and I'm fine.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat. Like gear is the tool, that's the tool, but that's not what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about.
I don't know. In fact,
I like the creative process behind it.
A lot. I'll hang out with a lot of my friends. We're at the dinner or whatever, and they're talking, and I'm like,
yeah.
I'm endorsed by Tsunami Cables, and
I know
we
Keith.
have a dinner. Huh?
I know Keith. He's a friend of mine.
We had a dinner at the end of the thing they have, and there was a gentleman there that runs Sushi Box pedals.
Okay,
and they were talking about stuff, and I'm like,
yeah. But see, Keith is an interesting one because he's a total gear guy. He had me shoot some video for his V15 preamp, and I'm like, dude, all right, like explain to me what I'm playing. Like I don't even know what most of these terms mean. You know, he's a total gear guy, but he's great at what he does.
Oh, he is, but it's just all the other guys are talking about these. I need this kind of thing and that, and I'm like,
yeah, right. Yeah, that's probably not the table to bring up the Lydian chromatic theory. No. I don't think that's the right dinner for that conversation.
So when it comes to gear, I don't check out a lot of stuff. Like I said, if I need something, whatever, or if there's a changeover, like if I'm not happy with something, and things do change. Sure. I mean, the bass that's right here, I just got last fall.
Okay.
And I've been saving 25 years for it.
Yeah. What is it?
So it's a 1920 Hawks Panormo.
Okay. I'm not familiar with the luthier.
Okay. If you were a middle school in the United States and you needed a French horn, you would go to American Music Supply, among other places.
Okay.
Excuse me. Hawks, which eventually became Boozy and Hawks, is still in business, and they're the same thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
They brought in instruments. So before 1930, they were Hawks and Son. After they were Boozy and Hawks. So this is a bass of French origin. But they're known to be big and loud and powerful and complex. And I've wanted one like this. I'm not saying this specifically, but what happened was, I'd been saving for, like I said, 25 years, putting money away when I could,
Yeah.
And I'm on the, I don't know if you ever heard of Upton Bass. They're up in Connecticut. Yeah. I'm on their mailing list, and it's bass porn. It comes up and you see this, and this came up, and my wife looked at me. She says, "You're going up, aren't you?" It's a 2.5 hour drive from New York City. Okay. She said, "You're going there, aren't you?" I said, "What? You're going, aren't you?" So I went and I tried 9 instruments from 1844 to just before the Second World War. Okay. And I just kept coming back.
1844 to what, 1938, 39?
It was a pre-war Juzak. That's what I remember. So it could have been before 1941. Yeah. Okay. Which pre-war Juzaks are like the most in-demand ones. Okay. And it was just amazing. I've done several gigs with it so far, and it's just frightening.
Is that the main upright? You have like kind of one you take to smaller gigs or outside gigs. I know you do play the silent bass as well.
But the silent bass is there. For anything I'm afraid to bring that to. That's
the silent bass goes. Yeah, that's good. I mean, it's the easy. You don't want to bring like a wood bass to a restaurant gig where someone's going to be dumb and mess it up.
The thing with this too is I wanted something 20th century, because before 20th century they were 3 strings, so I didn't want to deal with that, and I wanted 20th century because they're more stable. Sure. I mean, I wouldn't bring it out to a 97 degree gig, but if I went to like, a normal temperature gig outside where I was a controlled area,
of course,
I'd be okay with it.
Yeah. I was actually on a call with Parastro earlier today, and your name came up. Do you have Parastros on there?
Oh, I love Parastro strings.
Which ones are you playing?
I have perpetuals on the electric. Yeah. I have Evas on the silent bass, but I think I may change
to the perpetual.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing about.
But let me put it this way. Again, not being a gear guy. I've used Spiracores my entire career. Okay. Because my teacher said Spiracores.
Yeah. Until when? When did the switch happen? And did you get into the Evas first, or the obligatos first, and then get into the perpetual?
Probably 3. Just before the pandemic, I was looking into them. Maybe the year before. Okay. And I was talking to there's a guy one of the USA rep is right here in Long Island, which is about right. And I was talking to him, and he was giving me the idea, and I figured I would try the Evas on this because they were a little rounder. Mm-hmm. Right. And I like them, but the perpetuals just have such a great feel. Yeah. They have a great pizzicato feel. They're more forgiving on the bow, where Spiracores.
No, they're not. They're scratchy, and like Evas are forgiving. The little bit of the tension thing's a little weird. Obligatos, They're cool, but I'm interested to check these ones out.
Yeah. Get on a plane, come to New York.
Yeah, that's what Ed said.
But yeah, the tension is really good. I really like them. I have them. I have two uprights. I have this one. I have another one. I have them on them, and I love them.
Cool.
I really, really dig them.
Yeah. But go ahead.
I'm saying the problem with upright strings is you really can't shop around. Electrics, you can try 3 or 4 because they're $20 to $30 or $40 a set.
Yeah.
When you're talking about, $200 a set, you really can't try these.
Right. And the fact that each bass is going to respond different to them. So if you go, if you check out flats on a P bass, it's like, okay, that's flats on a P bass. All right.
Right.
What gauge do I want? Versus like, okay, how is the color of these strings going to complement or detract from the natural color of my bass? And what's that relationship going to be like? Well,
I did try them on. One of my friends, Leo Smith. He's out on tour with a show right now. But he had a good bass, and he had I think he had the Evas on it, and I tried them, and I was pretty happy with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I had those. I love those strings, actually. I love those strings. So what's coming up? You said you were working on some projects. You're doing some writing. Or you got some gigs coming up in New York for the projects? Are you going to be recording some stuff?
Well, I'm working some more with Guillermo, the composer. We're planning on some things right now. I'm trying to finish these tunes up through the summer, and then maybe in the fall start rehearsals because I got to find some more players.
Yeah.
So it'll be a rehearsal / audition.
What kind of instrumentation?
The core is going to be piano, obviously, bass, drums. And then I've written, and this is the other thing I think about. I've written with trumpet, alto, tenor, bari, and bass clarinet.
Okay.
So it depends on which song it is. So I have to decide if I do want to use all of them, and I have some of those people. I have to try to find some of the others. My issue isn't the talent to play the charts. It's understanding the harmonic aspect of it. Because I know guys that can play free, and I know guys that can play traditional. I'm trying to find guys in the middle.
Right.
And it's kind of hard.
Well, now when going back to talking about Freddie Freeloader and you loved that everybody had this kind of different approach to the same tune, are you interested in having that texture where everybody, like, let's say this guy plays more traditional, this guy plays out, or more avant-garde a little bit. Let's throw them in the mix and see how that changes the party. Yeah,
but the problem becomes, and this can be in any genre.
Yeah.
Some players that play free don't like to play with a chart, and some guys that play charts don't like to play free.
Sure.
And there's my issue. I did a gig, a casual gig a couple of months ago, and I was talking to this horn player who I love the way she plays, and I said, "Listen, I'm thinking about doing this and doing that." And she says, "No, not my thing."
Oh, really? She just
yeah. So it's just trying to find that mixture, but I'm not too worried about it. It just trying to find the right people, and it may take a little bit, but I know enough people that can help me out. It just when push comes to shove, it's like saying, I love to play R&B. It's like, oh, fine, I got a gig doing R&B tunes. We're gonna do all these tunes. Well, I don't know all of them. When push comes to shove,
Do you try to have a concept of personnel before you write and then write with them in mind?
No.
Okay. You write and then look for people to fulfill the order.
Yeah. I try to find what's in my head. If I get some players like the next generation of tunes, if I get some players that, I want, I might actually, I should take that back. The piano player, Chris Forbes, who's a piano player who I've been working with. I do think of him in mind because I like a lot of dense harmonies. I call them fuck you chords.
Yeah.
Right? And he knows what I mean.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff. So yeah, so I take that. I do have a caveat on it. With him, I do. But for the most part, it's like, what am I trying to say with this? Because I'm trying to make it a little different, but I want to make it not so different that it's not, not accessible. A lot of the things I've read about classical and jazz is that it became more untraditional. I use the term. Mm-hmm. One of the problems that is that it became very self-absorbing. I read a really interesting book on the movement of jazz as it became free. And what happened was the players were getting into, the freer music, and a lot of it too was during the civil rights movement too. So there was a lot of Afrocentric things going on. And when push came to shove, the African American community said, am I going to listen to this? Or am I going to listen to R&B, soul, and rock and roll, which has church roots and I'm used to already? So they went that way. Right. And the only thing that saved the freer stuff was academia. Sure. So what I'm trying to do is not do that. Trying to make it self-absorbing that, hey, I can play, this out stuff. No, I'm trying to make it that it's different enough to make it interesting. I hope. Yeah. I hope.
Yeah. You never know. You never know how it's going to land till it hits the ground. Maybe it landed well, or maybe it didn't. How much of that do you think is rhythmic? Because when I think about the conversation, the cultural conversation that you just explained, I think about it as so much of it is the beat. Because if you go back to the Harlem Renaissance with let's say Duke, jazz was the dance music. Well, dance music is still what continued. You can take, Duke Ellington to Sam Cooke all the way to whoever.
Oh, absolutely.
It's always the beat. It's the beat that got lost in bebop and in free music.
Yeah. That's definitely part of it. The other part was the I hate to use this term, the relentlessness of it. It just went on. Yeah. Right. There's some bands there's some groups like the Art Ensemble of Chicago. They got around it by doing more physical or visual things during the music. So it became a little more, of an all-encompassing thing. But yeah, the beat is part of it, and the extreme is part of it. If you're sitting there having, I see a rock tune, you have like this insane shred guitar solo. That's great. But if it goes on for 45 minutes, okay, right, do something else, right. And that's the problem with some, but even the classical stuff you're talking about, I read the thing on Karl Heinz Stockhausen, who's a contemporary electronic classical stuff. And the music goes on forever. And it's just like, it's almost, to me, in my opinion, it's almost penance. Sure. So it's the relentlessness of it, I think, sometimes too.
I mean, that automatically is going to kill a story, right? If every tune is just a story, every story has to have three main points. You have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
It's like the one I use all the time.
It's not a complete story if it doesn't end.
Right. Think of the first Transformers film. There was an hour fight scene. Right. I remember. And it's like, gee, what's going to happen? Robot's going to transform and then hit something. Yeah. Wow. What's going to happen again? Another one's going to transform. I was like, after a while, it's like, okay, we get it. Right. It's that kind of thing. After a while, you lost the whole concept of the action and the transformation and all that because you did it for an hour straight. Right. Right. So I think that's part of it too. It's the relentlessness of it.
Sure. Man, this is like the third or fourth time I've looked for this guy's name in my mind while you were speaking. Who is the director? Quentin Tarantino. That's the guy I'm thinking of. The fight scenes in Tarantino films. And it was something you said very early on in the conversation about something being gratuitous. And I thought of Tarantino, the fight scenes in Tarantino films. It's just over the top. Right. Completely like, all right, enough. Like, I'm not a huge Tarantino fan. I like some of it, but okay, enough. This isn't serving the story anymore. Right. And I think that's a lot of that can be related to what you're saying is right. When it is relentless, it's not serving the story. It's serving the individual or their drug habit or whatever. Right.
It's like when I was in college, my sight singing teacher, this poor bastard, I took him for independent study because I couldn't fit it anywhere else in my schedule. Yeah. And he wrote operas. Right. Okay. And I was talking to says, operas. He says, wait a minute. He says, what you need to do is you need to check out two things. Opera buffa, which is normally lighthearted and in English or the vernacular. And there's things called one act operas. They're like 20 minutes long. Okay. So he told me that there was where I was going to school, there was a summer program where they had people come in to do opera, amateurs, and they had one professional opera singer, and they did a performance at the end. So just go there. There's going to be 3 or 4 one-act plays. They're in English. They're funny. They're not like I'm dying or my that kind of thing.
Some heavy Wagner.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And it was very accessible, and I got it. So it's the same thing here. It's like, the 3-hour, atonal symphony, which I'm not trying to shit on it, but it's like, it's not accessible to the average person. I'm trying to find stuff that's just different enough that it's like, okay, this isn't, a bad wedding band playing Take the A Train.
Right.
But it's also something that I could listen to. Yeah. I'm hoping. I'm hoping.
Sure, man. I got a record coming out in October, and
let me know. I'd like to hear it.
It's a lot of that, some major influences were steps ahead, specifically for what you're talking about. It's bass, clarinet, vibes, me doubling, and drums. Looking for some interesting instrumentation and trying to make something that's still approachable but not overly commercial.
Right.
Hopefully has an element that, it'd be great if people bought it. Otherwise, it's just a really expensive business card.
I know that one.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, it's understanding that improvisatory music, whatever you want to call it, when you're playing any music, whether it's a blues thing or anything, or a jam band, it's not a cover band.
Right.
One of the things that there's a market here in New York, which, I'm not going to give a specific place, but excuse me, it's very conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point where, they'll call Autumn Leaves, you have to do the Miles intro. It's not 1957 anymore.
Right.
That kind of stuff. Well, you got to do that. No, you don't.
They're just real traditionalists. And
preservationist is the term. And it's like, this is not a jazz cover band.
Right.
When I used to teach the ensemble class, I used to make them hate me. I would say, we're going to do A Train. Okay, we're going to do A Train. And I would say, we're going to do it as a samba.
Yeah, good.
And they're like, and the horn, and I'll never forget it. One of the horn players is trying to fit the He's trying to fit it in the samba. And I stopped everybody. I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm playing A Train. I said, no, you're not. You're playing a samba.
Yeah.
And he couldn't get that. Once the melody in any kind of improvisatory music, regardless of genre, once the head is over, the melody is over, it doesn't exist.
Right.
It's us. And it's understanding that and trying to work with that and understand every time you play it. What Billy used to tell me, you have to put where you are right now. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you hungry? Are you angry? That all comes into it in a positive way. Mm-hmm. And it's got to be different every time. Does it have to be radically different? Maybe, maybe not.
Sure.
But it's got to be different. And that can take away from accessibility. But I think if it's managed right, it can be interesting.
Yeah, because the other thing if every time you play any tune, it always goes like this, whatever it is, let's say someday my Prince will come. Okay, well, we're going to start with the bass pedal and then, these built-in arrangements. Like there's a level of common information I think everybody should know when getting into this music. Cool. But other than that, you're just kind of putting on a uniform. You're going to put on your Someday My Prince Will Come uniform. Yep. And now we're going to do this for 6 minutes. All right, now it's Autumn Leaves with the boo 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 bit. All right, now I'm going to put on that uniform. None of it's creative. It's paint by colors, paint by numbers.
I sat in a panel discussion with a buddy of mine who was going for his doctorate. And he's half Austrian. And he was talking about, he would go to Austria throughout his childhood. And free music in Europe is very different than free music here. Maybe less so now, but it's way freer.
Yeah.
Way freer, way less interactive. And
less interactive, more free. Yeah. So more self-indulgent.
Yeah, but to the point where 4 people are sitting on stage, they're not even interacting with each other.
Oh, wow.
I mean, to the point where he says where he comes from, people go to see acts and go to see theater and music all the time. It's part of the culture. Everybody does it. It's supported. But the term in Austrian, I don't know the term. Yeah, it's not Ryan and I are going to go see XYZ. No. The term is we're going to be sitting in a theater.
Mm.
It's totally detached, right? And one of the things he said, because I have a piece of his thesis, I still have, and I've read it a couple of times and it just blows me away, is that this whole detachment of playing, and it's thought of, at least in Austria, and it may be the rest of Europe, I don't know, that playing the American songbook is nothing more than training. That a musician plays Autumn Leaves when he or she is learning. And when he or she starts to play, that's no more.
Right. But they think of it as if you would take one of those 30 Samandal etudes to the gig, and this is this is your solo performance is schlepping through, etude 15.
Right. And it's just like in Indian music where there are ragas just for learning. Right. There are just student ragas of the 14,000 whatever there are.
Yeah, I know there's a ton. Dude, you're going to have to come back on, man. We have a lot to talk about.
Sure.
That'd be great. And I want to hear more about what you and Guillermo, how that lands.
Yeah, I'm interested. He went out of town for a while. We're supposed to be doing stuff back in a little bit. It's an interesting project because, first of all, it takes me out of my comfort zone because it's much more orchestral like. Yeah. But and the charts are really hard. He'll pull out a chart like, oh, here's a chart, 200 beats per minute. What is this, death metal? What the hell? Yeah. But it's just a different place, and it's very interesting. But yeah, it's, you know what it is. You got to do stuff different because what happened? The worst thing we can do is stagnate.
Yeah, absolutely.
We all know players that are that way.
Yeah, and they're not fun to play with, and I don't want to be one of those guys.
Yeah, dude, thank you so much. This is wonderful. All right.
That was Mr. Charley Sabatino. Everything he had to say about continuing to move forward and the different concepts he's checking out as a composer. He's always investigating. He's always checking out new things. He's also staying diligent in regularly shedding the fundamentals. That's it, man. That's it. Like, kind of hold on to what you got. Do a little just maintenance and housekeeping. Keep the fundamentals together, and then always looking for new stuff, checking things out. When he was talking about some of those harmonic aspects and he didn't know what he thought of them yet. I loved that. That was some of my favorite stuff. It's like, he's going to check it out and then, see how he responds to it. But he's not going to make a judgment call before checking it out. Very inspiring. So Charley, thank you for that. If you are enjoying the Bass Shed podcast, please hit subscribe wherever you are listening to it. And in other social media news, all my accounts got hacked and then shut down. That's fun. So the new Instagram account is at the _bass_shed. There's just underscores between the three words. At the _bass_shed. Follow that if you're interested. And that's all I got for this one, folks. That's all I got for this one. I will catch you on the next one in a minute.